Hello, everyone, and welcome to this introductory lecture on American literature. I want to get some of the history stuff out of the way before we even get started so we can focus on the literature. And the history that I want to talk about is the very early history of America before it was even America, really. Um, so we will talk about how it started. How did America become America? Okay, first of all, um, they say Columbus discovered America, but he really didn't. It kind of sitting there. And people first started coming to America. There's estimates between 40,000 years ago and 20,000 years ago. People came to America sometime during the last ice age. Uh, when the ice age ended at about 10,000 years ago, so they're definitely here by 10,000 years ago, the seas were lower. There was more land, and the seas were also frozen. They could walk across. So they think the current theory is people came from somewhere in Siberia and came to America, and they're still trying to come from Siberia to America. I mean, Siberia sucks. So, it makes sense. So they walked over um, from Siberia. I don't think you can walk over anymore, no, but they're still trying to come. So, okay. So um, they're not really sure when people arrived because there was this land that was created around Alaska, and they're talking about a fairly big piece of land. I mean, this was bigger than the country of Turkey. Um, and then people were walking over. So they were saying that they didn't just walk directly over. They slowly came over. They stayed in this land for a couple thousand years, actually, and then moved into uh, America as they could get through the snow and the ice and find things. So it was slow. It wasn't like they just, picked up and decided, hey, I'm going to move to America. I moved to America. They were probably following herds of mammoth and other animals that they hunted and ended up coming over to America. In America, the earliest kind of people that they have is they call this Clovis people, and they're not really sure how organized these people were. This is prehistoric. They didn't write. They didn't have any writing. They really don't know much about the people, but they made a particular kind of spear that they started to find throughout America. So they were sharing this technology, and they hunted these mammoths and other animals and kind of hung out in California. So this was kind of how it works. This landmass, this kind of area that was there, is bigger than Turkey. They call Beringia, and so they came from Siberia. They moved into Beringia. They hung out there. They moved across the glaciers and into North America. So this is how people arrived. And again, that was somewhere between 40,000 years ago and 20,000 years ago. There's people, the scientists, the um, archaeologists, uh, don't really agree on that. But they came here. So there were a lot of people here, and they had civilizations. So, they started farming and developing cities, towns, villages. Around 9,000 years ago, they did the farming, and then they started doing the cities and cultures and started being unified people around 4,000 years ago. And they built pyramids and they built monuments and they built a lot of things. They were an agricultural society. The best known societies are the Mayas, Incas, and Aztecs. These are the Mesoamerican societies. They're now in um, Mexico mostly, and South America. So these countries. This, by the way, this picture, this pyramid here is Chichen Itza. I was there, and it's really kind of hard to climb up those stairs. They're very steep. I think these people were very kind of strong people, very fit. They and you go up to the top. It's pretty interesting. It's a cool place. I would recommend if you get a chance to go to Mexico, go to Chichen Itza. It's a very cool place. Very very interesting place. Okay, so those are the Mesoamerican uh, cultures. And I'm going fast. I mean, there's a lot to say about these cultures, but I'm just kind of letting you know, okay, this is what happened. This is what's going on in America. These cultures were pretty much all gone or in decline by the time the Europeans came. In North America, there are a lot of groups. One of the most interesting is the Anasazi. And the Anasazi, this is a Navajo word actually that means the ancient ones. So these are the ancient people, they called them. And they lived in these buildings that they called pueblos. And these are multi-story buildings. So these are like apartment buildings. So these guys had like apartment buildings that they lived in. Um, and kind of pretty well developed cities. I mean, so this little city here, this little, they called it a pueblo, um, had about 200 rooms in it, and I don't know how many people you can fit in the rooms, but and then there were probably huts and other places outside of the village. So a couple thousand people living together in some kind of an organized fashion. And then in the Northeast, there were groups called this is Southwestern America. You had the Iroquois in the uh, Northeast, which is a combination of tribes. And, all throughout the North America, you can see there were all these tribes. So this is one of the problems that the Native Americans had. The Native Americans, so the Europeans show up, and the question that people ask is, why didn't they just kill the Europeans? And it's because they were fighting with each other too much. Because these were all different countries, all these different tribes are all different countries. They're fighting each other. They saw these guys show up. They said, "Hey, maybe these European guys can help us beat our enemies." They weren't really thinking of the Europeans as enemies. They didn't know. So anyway, that's America. A lot of people. It was not like a barren landscape with nobody there. I mean, people were there. They were hanging out. So what do you do? I mean, you got people there. You want to move there. Well, you kill them. That's the thing to do. Kill the people, take their land. You know, that's kind of what people do. So they show up. Now the Vikings showed up first. They showed up in like Canada area, and they built some settlements. But the Vikings didn't stay for a long time. The Danes, I think they were more focused on fighting wars in England and that kind of stuff. But the Vikings showed up. A guy Leif Erikson showed up around 1000 BC. Okay, so then Columbus shows up. Okay, Columbus comes in here in 1492, and so this is when Henry VII was king. So it was before all the Protestant stuff happened in England and all these things. So it was a big deal. Now Columbus came back and said, "Hey, there's gold over here. There's people who can do things. There's fields of usable land." But he really didn't bring back too much. He brought back some slaves. So this was kind of cool. Yeah, we got slaves. More people to abuse. Um, and on his second trip, he brought back like 500 slaves because he couldn't find the gold and treasure. And he presented them to the Queen of Spain. Here are 500 slaves. And the Queen of Spain says, "What are you thinking? Chris, you're nuts. I don't want these slaves. Set them free." So, So Chris said, okay, I'm going to go back. And he went back. He went back to America 4 times. He made 4 trips in his life. But people got excited. They said, hey, there's stuff over there. Um, and what they were looking for, what Columbus thought he was going to do, is Columbus, he was kind of crazy. He said, I am going to go to the east by going west. Yeah, so it's kind of a crazy idea, how to go east by going west. Um, but that's what he did. And then he bumped into land. He said, yay, I made it. I'm in the east. I'm in India. All these people are Indians. And then there was this guy, this other explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, and Vespucci said, this is not India, guys. Okay, get real. This is a whole another continent. And people were like, another continent? How did we miss that? I mean, that's kind of big. And they said, yeah, well, you missed it. It's here, and it's another continent, and so they called it America. Okay. And then, so Columbus came back a bunch of times. And Columbus was never really that successful, actually, himself. But then after Columbus came the conquistadores, okay? And so these guys started coming over, and Cortez conquered the Aztecs. These are the guys who brought the gold back to Spain. So all of a sudden, you got all this gold going back to Spain. Spain's all happy. Spain can now buy big armies. Spain is doing things in Europe. And they built settlements in the Americas, but they were mostly interested in making the indigenous people be Spanish. So they said this is our land now, and you people are Spanish. And so and the people said, well, we're not really Spanish. And they said, well, the queen says you are, so shut up. And so they tried to turn them they tried to make them Christians. Yeah, I think they had some success with that. Um, but there was a lot of bad things, raping and killing and stealing all their gold. And it was really kind of sad because a lot of the gold was in these beautiful artifacts, and they just melted them down, melted down all this beautiful ancient artwork and put them in their boats and took them back to Spain. But that's what you do. So they were over there adventuring and doing all this stuff, conquering people. They had this concept of the city of El Dorado. And El Dorado is the city of gold. So the legend was that El Dorado is an entire city made out of gold. Everywhere is gold. And so they spent a lot of effort to look for this. And they also spent a lot of effort looking for the Fountain of Youth, which they thought was somewhere in Florida. Um, I could use it. I don't know if any of you guys know where it is. Please let me know. I would like a drink from the Fountain of Youth. Okay, so after Columbus, the Portuguese come in, they claim Brazil. The French come in and they start New France. The Dutch come in to, they created New Amsterdam. The Dutch weren't really successful. The British kicked them out, and New Amsterdam became New York. So New York was originally a Dutch settlement and founded by Dutch people. The British showed up in 1607, and they were in Jamestown. So you got the French, the Spanish, and the English who are all kind of making claims on America. You had the Netherlands, the Dutch, and Sweden. They were not really big, but they tried, to make some colonies. So in 1620, the Pilgrims, there were these Puritans. So you remember Oliver Cromwell and all this stuff. Um, and then Oliver Cromwell lost, and they got the king back. And then, so there were all these Puritans who were saying, oh, now we're not in power anymore. And we can't really be Puritans anymore. And they said, well, go to America, and you can do whatever you want over there. No one cares. There's no one there. Let's go. So they went to America and were doing different things. So the Spanish wanted everyone to be Catholic. They established these missions. The English wanted farmland because in England you couldn't really have a farm. You couldn't really be a farm owner. It was very hard to go from a farm worker to a farm owner. And if you didn't like the government, you could always just go to America. So it was the thing to do for a while to go to America. Here's a map. This is kind of how it is. You had the French kind of in the middle. Now the English, interesting, they just had this little, but the English had the coast, you see. So that was pretty important. The Spanish just have this area down here, but the Spanish also had all of South America. So except for Portugal's, which had Brazil, but the Spanish, had all of America, and Spanish actually owned a big chunk of California too. So that's what it looked like. And so let's focus now on the English in America and what they did, because that kind of became into what America is. They had England had their colonies kind of divided up into three groups. They had the colonies they called New England, which is Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Um, they had the middle colonies, which they called Delaware, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. The southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. And so that was all they had. Now, each of these colonies were very, very different from each other. They were very separate. It's not like now where you just get in your car and you drive from Maryland to Virginia. It takes like 45 minutes. It was like, no, horse trips, and roads were not good, and you're going through dense forest. And then there were these Indians who would attack you and steal stuff from you, and you know rape your wives and all this stuff. So they pretty much stayed in their colonies, and they didn't really contact each other. And also, each colony had like a different religious feelings. Pennsylvania was all very Protestant. Maryland, they wanted to create Maryland as a place where Catholics could go. Because if you remember, in England, they didn't like Catholics very much. So they said, okay, if you want to be Catholics, go away. Go from here. Goodbye. Goodbye. Get on a boat, go to America. Okay. So that's what they did. Okay. And so the colonies were saying there were the French here, and the French and the English started to bump up against each other. And Benjamin Franklin says, guys, we gotta hang together, or the French are gonna really mess with us. And the colonies were not really into hanging together. They were very different people. And the Franklin said, these Native Americans, the Indians, they joined up in this Iroquois group, and they did it pretty well. How come they can do it better than we can, and you're calling them savages? But they still didn't do it. They still didn't do it. So here's the timelines. Da, 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 all colonized. They all got colonized. They all made colonies in America. Okay, so there they are. 1607, 1732 is the last one. Georgia. Georgia is an interesting colony because they sent people from the prison to Georgia, people who couldn't pay their debts, people who couldn't really sustain themselves, people who were socially unacceptable in England, and they sent them to Georgia. So Georgia was a social responsibility project. I know you don't get very many social responsibility projects, but if you've ever tried one, there's a big one. It's Georgia was a social responsibility project that they did. I hope this makes sense. Okay, there was a war. It was the French and Indian War, and it's the 7 Years' War, they call it in England. And this was France, was expanding into the Ohio Valley, and the British were expanding, and it's not like you could say, okay, this is where my country ends and your country ends, and it wasn't like a little line or a fence and a little border guard within the gate there, it was just people doing stuff. And you started having, French people who started hunting on the area of the British people. They said, hey, these guys are killing all of our animals that we eat, and so we don't have food, and so we're not happy. And so they started having like these little wars. And in 1754, they attacked a British fort, and they defeated this guy, George Washington. And he lost. George lost and went home and cried. And but they didn't like this. The British didn't like them beating up, people like George and all the other British in there. So in 1756, they declared war. And the British and the French, like, they've been having wars forever. I mean, the whole Norman invasion, 1066, you remember that? Yeah, I know you forgot all that stuff. Anyway, those were French guys, and they came into England, and then England was attacking France, and there was the Hundred Years' War and all this stuff. So the French and the British, they go back and forth for thousands of years. Um, there was a problem with this war because the English didn't really care very much about what happened in America. They were interested in Europe, and the colonies were not working together. So the French were kind of winning, but then this guy William Pitt came up and he said, "Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy some Prussians, this army, and I'm going to send them to fight in Europe, and then I'm going to give money to the colonists to fight in America." So then America started winning, the British started winning, and then Spain joined France, and then in 1763, Britain won and took Florida and Canada, and these became British areas. Okay, so that's what it was. And so then after the war, what happened? Because how did that become America? Um, England doesn't want colonists settling beyond the Appalachians. They say we cannot protect you if you go beyond the Appalachian Mountains, which are like Kentucky. So at that point, if you look on a map, it's pretty far to the east, but at that point, that was west. If you go beyond the Appalachians, you're in the west. And so they said you can't go that way. But Daniel Boone says, I'm going to go. And so he went, and people saw that he could do it and be successful. He found this Cumberland Gap, which was an easy way to get through the mountains, and the Americans started going there anyway. So the British were trying to defend these people. To pay for that, they started taxing them. Okay? And they passed the Sugar Act, which taxed them and also let them do like some really kind of not good legal things to American people. In 1765, they passed the Stamp Act, which really got people mad because they're taxing like newspapers and everything. So anytime anybody wants to do anything, they have to pay money to Britain, money to Britain. Every time they're doing something, here's money to Britain, money to Britain. Oh my goodness. But they also said that the colonies have to pay to support the British Army. So if you have a British Army and the British Army comes to your village, they're just going to say, look, we're going to stay in your house. And the people will say, well, where are we going to stay? They said, we don't care. And the people had to go camp in the back of their house until the British got done staying there. They weren't very happy about it. So they refused to do these things. They refused to take care of them. And then the British says, okay, we're not going to do this, but we're going to do these other taxes. And they started taxing all these things. So there was a lot of unrest, and people were not happy. And then the British sent more military to America to keep these Americans under control because they were getting out of hand. And then in 1770, there was this Boston Massacre thing where there were some people who were like angry at the army guys, and they were saying bad things to them. And then one of the army guys throws a snowball. This guy's gun fires, and then they think they're being shot at, and then the soldiers killed 5 people, and it was like this is just not even good. All this British army over here is not good, killing our people. We don't like it. Then in 1773, the Tea Act, what they'd said is that, okay, so the Brits are getting all this tax from people who are selling stuff, but then they're saying, okay, well, we're not going to tax this British company. And so then there wasn't money that was coming into America. The money was again going back to Britain. And so the Americans didn't like this. They dressed up as Mohawk Indians and dumped all the tea into the ocean. That's the Boston Tea Party. Okay, so the British say these colonies can't even, they're out of control. We got to be more strict with them. And the Americans started saying, okay, we're not going to buy anything made in Britain ever again. And it got worse and worse. And then it's in 1775, the British started to attack the Americans. And George Washington became the commander of the Continental Army. They called it the Americans. And they, anyway, so he proved to be a very good commander, and he was very successful in this battle of Bunker Hill. And so then the Americans are controlling Boston, and they're saying, look, you British guys really cannot push us around. And the Americans say, look, if you will give us some respect and give us the rights and let us live peacefully, we'll stop this war. But King George says, no, you Americans, you guys, we're not going to listen to you. You have to respect the king. And so then in 1776, Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense. And this is some literature, and this was really, really important. It was about 35-page little booklet, little pamphlet. And people started reading it and started saying, yeah, this whole thing with England doesn't make very much sense, and we need to fight against England. And so they started fighting. July 4th, they say we are independent from England, and France started helping in a kind of a sneaky way. France didn't come out and say we're going to help, but in a secret way, they started helping America. And so then the American Revolution was on. And Washington learned all these things from the way the Indians and was very successful against the British. And finally, in 1781, the British surrender, and in 1783, the Treaty of Paris, the war is finally over. There's an interesting side note. This guy, Daniel Shea, says, look, this American government is giving us taxes that are too high, the same as the British, and so he wanted to rebel against the Americans. So you need to understand that America still wasn't this cohesive place. I mean, people were still fighting with each other and things like that. In 1787, they adopt the Constitution, and then they came up with the American flag, right? The old stars and bars. And here's the flag and the way it evolved over the years. So they keep adding the stars, but the stripes are the same. Stripes are the same. So they added these. In the 1960s, they added Hawaii and Alaska, and that's how we got our present flag today. Well, that was pretty quick, but I just kind of wanted to do that here now. I mean, well, even that wasn't half an hour. So, I want to, but I just kind of want to get this historical thing out of the way so you have an idea of where America came from and some of the struggle that went on to create the country, because a lot of what happens later will be based on this birth of America. So anyway, I'll see you on Friday. We'll look at the syllabus. The class is going to be a little bit different from the English literature class, but not too much. And then we will discuss a little bit about America. Will go up to 1830. We're going to start getting into the literature. I wanted to get this out of the way so that we can start focusing on the literature. Yeah, I wanted you to have the context, the background of America before we really got into the literature, because all literature is contextual. And I wanted you to really understand how important the Native Americans are in creating America. It was really the foundation for the United States Constitution, was the way that the Iroquois were able to keep their people together. So, it's pretty, the Native Americans are pretty important to America. Anyway, I've talked a lot. I hope you learned something, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Friday. Okay? I hope everything else is going well, and it's going to be great to see you guys again. Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye bye.